Okay, welcome to day 17 of the 2022 challenge for families and households. As I mentioned, I'm playing catch up here, so it's not really day 17, it's probably about day 34, 35. But, I'm catching up on these, and hopefully I'm going to be getting out quite a few of them this week, so that we can get them all done in time for the exams. Just over a month away to the first exam. These questions that we're looking at here would be on paper 2, which is in early June. Families and households, for those of you who study it, is the theme for this week. On day 17, so the second one of the families and households ones we've done, outline and explain 2 ways changes in gender roles have impacted on the functions of the family. Okay, so changes in gender roles and things like dual learner families, greater shared responsibility of childcare, how the division of labour has become less one-sided. And we could also talk about sort of like how there's been an increase in things like the dual burden and the triple shift as well, and how they have impacted on the functions of the family. So we've got our 2 different spec points here. So if we look at these, so we have our 2 spec points here. So there's gender roles is 1. My writing's got even worse since the last video, mainly because the pen I was using with the graphic tablet has run out of a battery in the 5 minutes it's taken me to do the last video and this one, and how it has impacted on the functions of the family. So there's the link between those 2 spec points. Our second question here is applying material from item A, analyse 2 reasons for changes to gender roles within relationships. So we're looking straightforward for what's in this item. And we're looking for 2 ways in which gender roles have changed. So we can look at flexible working, changing perceptions of masculinity, and women's changing priorities. There's a few hooks that we could use. I'll look at that one a little bit later. Let's look at the first one. So how do changing gender roles impact on the functions of the family? This is the type of question where I think you have to almost work backwards, and you have to take a function of the family and think, right, okay, how has that changed in society because of changing gender roles? So one way is through the economic function. We work backwards and we look at the economic function and we go, right, how has the economic function changed in the family? Well, we know that there is more dual learner families now. We know that women are more likely to be in work, so therefore we can make the link between those. Women may have more financial independence than before. Many families are now dual earner families. This increases women's say in decision making, and it improves household income. I say theoretically there because obviously in the 1970s families could get by on like 1 income. We look at contemporary society and many families are struggling with 2 incomes, in part because of the high cost of childcare, high cost of energy, lots of other things. I'm sure you're aware of the cost of living crisis at the moment. Reproductive function. Okay, so we know the family has a reproductive function. How might that be impacted by changes in gender roles? Well, one thing we know is that because more women are in work, women are having children later, which means that the family may be delayed. There may be a delay to starting the family, or there may be less children. So we're reproducing less children, and this is something that is happening in society. We've got an ageing population. We're getting to the stage where in the next 5 or 6 years there's going to be quite a burden on people who are working versus those who have reached retirement age and beyond. So that's one function that we can see as being influenced by changing gender roles. Gender socialization as well. This might be one that you don't think about, but if girls have a role model within the family who is working, they start to make the assumption that it is normalized for girls to work. Now, if you've grown up with this, you might go, well, why is that a big deal? Go on and have a career. If we look at some of the research from families and households, people like Sue Sharp, which may also be in education as well, and you talk about changing girls' aspirations. Girls were largely socialised into an expressive role and taught to look after the family, while males are socialised into the instrumental role. Well, what's happening now in contemporary society is girls are being socialised into doing both the instrumental and expressive role. We can also say there that because of the dual learner family, because there's more responsibilities, changing ideas of masculinity, some boys are starting to take on more of an expressive role. Some men, I should say, are taking on more expressive roles and looking after their children. But we could also argue here as well the dual burden and the triple shift, that there has been a change in gender roles, and it's actually increased the workload on women through the dual burden and the triple shift. So our dual burden is paid work and domestic work and childcare, and the triple shift is paid work domestic work and childcare, and the emotional labour of the family. And this certainly is the case for lone parent families. So let's look at my answers. One way changes in gender roles have impacted on the functions of the family is through women's involvement in paid work. As societies progress towards greater gender equality in the workplace through policies such as the Equal Pay Act and the Equality Act, more women have taken on paid employment. So we're seeing, this is me identifying the changes in the gender roles. This provides them with greater financial independence from their husbands and also provides their family with greater economic security. So I've started to make the link here towards the functions of the family. The economic function was highlighted by Murdoch as being one of the 4 functions of the family that provided benefits for both members of the family and for wider society. However, Murdoch and subsequently Parsons saw this as being achieved by the male in the family, and so the change to having a dual income family changes the burden of the economic function from being on a male breadwinner to both partners, right? I have introduced a bit of evaluation in here. Some people say, you don't need to evaluate for an outline and explain. I always like to sort of like throw some evaluation in where I can because it encourages critical thinking. You're not going to lose marks for putting an evaluation in. It might gain you a little bit. However, feminists would argue that women are still expected to take on the majority of the unpaid labour in the home as well, so there is little change in that regard. Second way in which changing gender roles have impacted on the functions of the family is through gender socialisation, so I've identified my second way. Whilst the traditional nuclear family was based upon children being socialised into their gender roles by their same-sex parent, these roles were based upon a biological division of labour, with males taking on the instrumental role of being the breadwinner and females the expressive role of caring for and nurturing the family. You could, if you wanted to thicken that out a bit, talk about Parsons' sex role theory, and this is who suggested sort of like the instrumental and expressive role. As women have become more involved in paid labour, this has changed the way in which young girls are socialised. So here's my link. I've explained the change in gender role, and now I'm going to explain sort of like how it links to the functions of the family. In contemporary society, girls are socialised into having career ambitions of their own through observation of their mothers being in paid labour. This alters the functions of the family as it no longer reproduces an instrumental and expressive role, but rather combined conjugal roles that are undertaken by both males and females, which impacts on the expectations of their children to take on both roles in future. That's me develop the response. 2 good, strong responses there. You're looking, I would say, sort of like that's a minimum of 7 out of 10, if not sort of like 8 or 9. Let's look at question 2. Of course, remember question 2. Well, it wouldn't be question 2, so I think it's question 3 and 4. It's question 4 and 5 and 6 on the paper. It says apply material from item A, analyse 2 reasons for changes to gender roles within relationships. Okay, so we've got to pick out things in the item here. The things I picked out early on were flexible working, changing perceptions of masculinity, and women's changing priorities. Okay, let's see how we can develop those. So, why have gender roles changed over the last 50 years? We know that there's been a rise of feminism. More women are working and have career aspirations, which results in them having more economic power. We have changing expectations, particularly for women. As women are less financially dependent upon men, relationships become negotiated and are based upon a partnership of equals. And through gender socialisation, have been socialised into wanting to have a career and wanting to be educated. All of these things that we have in contemporary society that didn't always exist 50 years ago. Careers, lifestyles, friendships, health and nutrition. Many choose not to marry out of social obligation. So this can be a change to our gender roles. Changing masculinities. Well, we can link in a little bit of Ulrich Beck here. Changes to employment, relationships and social norms have led males to embrace home and family life as it offers more certainty than employment. Beck looked at the idea that men are more likely to define themselves by fatherhood now than by their employment, because their employment can change, whereas fatherhood should never change. It's a permanent thing. We can also talk about giddens and reflexivity. Both males and females look for self-improvement in their lives, including the home and the family, with males defining themselves by their status as fathers, and higher standards of living. Housework is less labour intensive than in previous generations, more technology to aid housework and to make the home a better place to spend free time. This is a little bit of like Silver and Shaw. We could also link in a little bit of Wilmot and Young movement toward the symmetrical family here, and the idea that sort of like, leisure time is centered around the family, whereas he argued in early industrial times it was very much divided, and men would go down to the pub and women would stay at home. But in society, in contemporary society, the home is very much central to leisure time, and even leisure time sort of like is more centered around family rather than individuals. So, here we go. Apply material from item A, analyse 2 reasons for changes of gender roles within relationships. I've put my first reason here. 1 reason for changing gender roles within relationships is women's changing priorities. Item A. Remember, signposted it, made sure the examiner knows that I have taken something from the item and I'm going to develop that point. Over the past 50 years, the rise in feminism in society has provided women with greater opportunities in education and employment, and this has led to women having higher aspirations than in previous generations. Sharp outlined this change when examining the attitudes of schoolgirls to their future in the 1970s and early 1990s. In the 70s, girls prioritised love, marriage and children, but when a similar cohort of students were asked almost 20 years later, their priorities changed to education and careers. This has impacted on gender roles, as women are less likely to choose to marry earlier in life, and as a consequence are usually more financially independent and have different attitudes to relationships than previously, preferring a partnership of equals and having higher expectations of their partners, contributing towards domestic labour and childcare. So what I've done is I've taken it and I've talked about my reason. I've identified the reason, women's changing priorities, rise of feminism, and then I've linked it all the way down to sort of like how that has a knock-on effect to women having higher expectations of relationships, and therefore look for more equal relationships. Here's my second paragraph. A second reason for the changes in gender roles within relationships has been the change in perceptions of masculinity. Item A, again, signposted. In contemporary society, males are more likely to define themselves by their role as a father than by their occupation. Beck argues that this is a result of the greater insecurity in late modern society around employment, whereas fatherhood is a lifelong commitment. As a result, males invest more time in their children and play a more active role in child rearing than in previous generations. This, combined with higher expectations of men to contribute to domestic labour, have created more equality between males and females in their relationships. However, feminists would argue that males are less likely to deal with the emotional burdens of children, and women are still most likely to be seen as the primary caregiver in relationships despite increased male involvement. Okay, so we move on to day 18. The answers for this are already up on the website. I'm going to do another video on this. It may be up today, it may be up tomorrow. Outline and explain 2 ways increased life expectancy has impacted on changes to the family structure. So how is with the fact that we're living longer impacted on the family structure? How has it impacted on marriages? How has it impacted on divorce? How has it impacted on the type of family we're part of and the types of family we may be part of over the life course? Second question, apply material from item A, analyse 2 ways childhood can be argued to be a social construction. The idea would be is that sort of like childhood differs from one society to another, and this is why we argue it's socially constructed. The items are over the past 50 years, the experiences of children in society have changed. While some children benefit from changes that place children at the centre of society, others are often isolated or have adult burdens placed upon their young shoulders. So you can see here I've hinted that childhood is not the same for everybody, and what we may look to do then sort of like is develop a couple of points from that. Maybe children are isolated, maybe children having adult burdens, maybe children being at the centre of society, and how we can argue that childhood is a social construction. Childhood can be seen as a social construction even in the UK. Lots of people will see the social construction part and go, right, okay, we have to do international comparisons. You can compare the experiences of children across the UK. So some kids who are living in poverty will have a very different lifestyle than children who are from quite wealthy families. Girls will have different experiences to boys. Based on your ethnic background, your experience of childhood is going to be different as well. So these can all be used to argue that childhood is a social construction. Okay, so that concludes day 17. Thanks for watching.